At dawn on April 1st, 1945, the horizon off Okinawa was filled with steel. More than 1,000 American ships, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, carriers, transports, formed the largest invasion fleet of the Pacific War. The Marines and soldiers on board had heard the rumors. Okinawa would be unlike anything they had ever faced. It was the final stepping stone before Japan itself, the last bastion of the empire's outer defense. And unlike on Iwo Jima, this island held not just soldiers, but hundreds of thousands of civilians. As the landing craft roared toward the beaches, the men braced for hell. They expected machine guns, artillery, and a wall of fire like never before. But when the ramps dropped, the beaches were empty, silent. No opposition, no gunfire, no defenders. Instead, they found abandoned trenches, shredded uniforms, and propaganda leaflets fluttering in the wind. Confusion rippled through the American lines. Where was the Japanese army? General Mitsuru Ushijima had laid a trap. Rather than waste his troops in pointless beach fighting, he pulled them deep into Okinawa's southern mountains, into labyrinths of caves, fortified ridges, and artillery emplacements carved into limestone. He would make the Americans pay for every hill, every valley, every foot of soil. The calm on the beaches was not peace. It was the breath before the storm. Okinawa was not a barren rock like Iwo Jima. It was a living world, farms, villages, schools, forests, terraced fields. But now it was a battlefield. Civilians hid in limestone caves with their families, listening to distant shelling as American forces advanced inland. Many spoke only the Okinawan dialect, making communication nearly impossible. Some didn't know who to fear more, the invading Americans or the Japanese soldiers who demanded obedience and sacrifices. The Americans split into two directions. The Marines pushed north toward rugged terrain, while the Army moved south, unaware they were marching straight into the strongest defensive system Japan had ever built. Beneath their feet, unseen tunnels ran for miles. Japanese troops moved silently through the dark, emerging behind American lines to strike without warning. Villages became minefields. Orchards hid snipers who fired a single shot before melting into the hills. Fields that once grew sweet potatoes now concealed anti-tank guns. Even children, terrified and desperate, fled through crossfire as Marines tried to pull them to safety. Okinawa was a battlefield with two wars happening at once, the war for the island and the war for its people. While the Army prepared to assault the deadly southern ridges, the Marines marched north into seemingly easier terrain. But the northern forests hid a different kind of danger. The Japanese 44th Independent Mixed Brigade had scattered itself across hillsides, ravines, and jungled peaks, fighting a war of delay rather than annihilation. They struck fast, disappeared faster, and forced the Marines into constant, exhausting patrols. Mount Yaidake became the centerpiece of the northern fight, a natural fortress rising sharply into the sky. Every ridge was a trap. Snipers waited in trees, cave entrances were hidden by vines, machine guns fired from slits invisible even at close range. Rain turned paths into mud rivers, slowing every advance. The Marines crawled uphill under fire, gaining ground at a cost measured in inches. Yet despite the terrain, despite the snipers and ambushes, the Marines pushed relentlessly forward. Villages were searched house by house. Ravines were cleared grenade by grenade. The Japanese defenders fought with cunning, but they were isolated, cut off from Ushijima's main force to the south. By late April, the northern half of Okinawa was finally in American hands. The easy part was over. In the south lay the true nightmare, the Shuri Line. Stretching across Okinawa's width, it was the most formidable defensive network of the entire Pacific War. Hills honeycombed with tunnels, concrete bunkers linked by underground rail carts, artillery hidden in caves, firing and then disappearing behind armored shutters. Every ridge was covered by another ridge behind it, and every valley was a killing field. The Army's 24th Corps marched directly into this fortress. Rain fell almost constantly, turning the battlefield into a swamp of mud that swallowed trucks and immobilized tanks. Soldiers slipped, crawled, and clawed their way forward, only to be pinned down by mortars and machine gun nests hidden in the limestone cliffs. The 32nd Army fought with discipline and precision, each position designed to kill as many attackers as possible before falling back into deeper lines. American artillery pounded the ridges day and night. Battleships offshore fired so many shells that mountains themselves seemed to shake. But when infantry advanced, Japanese guns came alive once more, as if untouched. The Shuri Line was not just a defense. It was a machine built to grind armies into dust. If any place on Okinawa deserved the name Hell, it was Sugarloaf Hill. A small, innocuous mound on the map, yet it became one of the deadliest battlefields in Marine Corps history. The hill was actually part of a triad: Sugarloaf, Half Moon, and Horseshoe. Together they formed an interlocking system of fire that shredded any unit attempting to climb even one of them. The 6th Marine Division attacked Sugarloaf again and again. Each assault ended the same way: Marines clawing their way up loose soil under machine gun fire from 3 directions. Grenades rained down from hidden trenches above. Mortar rounds exploded behind them. Snipers struck from the flanks. The wounded slid back down the slope, leaving trails in the mud. Some companies went into battle with 200 men and came back with fewer than 40. Corpsmen ran through fire to reach the dying, often becoming casualties themselves. Tanks tried to support the infantry, but bogged down or were destroyed by anti-tank guns hidden in caves. After a week of non-stop attacks, Sugarloaf finally fell. Its slopes were soaked in rain, mud, and blood. It was victory, but at a cost beyond imagination. While soldiers and Marines bled across the ridges of Okinawa, another battle raged at sea, a battle that turned the waters around the island into a graveyard of ships and shattered nerves. Japan had unleashed a new terror in full force: the kamikaze. From airfields on Kyushu and Formosa, young pilots took off in aging Zero fighters and bomb-laden aircraft with one-way fuel loads. Their mission was simple and horrifying: find an American ship and crash into it. No return, no bailout, just impact. For the U.S. Navy, the sky itself had become a weapon. Radar picket destroyers, stationed far from the main fleet, bore the brunt of the storm. Their job was to give early warning of incoming raids. In practice, that meant standing alone against waves of desperate pilots diving out of the sun. Lookouts screamed warnings, gunners swung their cannons skyward, and tracers filled the air in frantic arcs. Sometimes they stopped the attackers, sometimes they didn't. Ships vanished in pillars of flame and smoke. Decks were torn open, planes hurled like toys, fuel ignited in instant infernos. Sailors dragged wounded comrades across red-slick steel while damage control parties fought to keep ships afloat. Even when vessels survived, crews carried the memory of a screaming engine closing in, the split second before impact when death seemed certain. The battle for Okinawa was no longer just on land. It was above and beneath the waves, and every horizon burned. As the fighting intensified, Okinawa's civilians found themselves caught in a tightening vice. Entire families huddled in cave shelters, dark, airless spaces where smoke, fear, and whispers filled the air. Japanese troops shared many of these caves, turning them into command posts, firing positions, and field hospitals. Orders and rumors spread. The Americans would show no mercy. Capture meant humiliation or worse. Reality on the ground was more complicated. Many American units tried desperately to separate civilians from combatants, calling them forward with interpreters, offering food, water, and medical aid. But fear was stronger than words. Some Okinawans fled deeper into the hills, unsure who to trust. Others were forced by Japanese soldiers to stay, used as porters, shields, or simply as proof of loyalty. Artillery shells did not distinguish between uniforms and simple work clothes. Houses burned. Rice fields were shattered by bomb craters. Families stumbled out of caves clutching children and blankets, only to find themselves under fire when Japanese troops used their flight as cover. In some places, desperate civilians took their own lives rather than face an uncertain future, pushed by propaganda, panic, or the unbearable strain of war closing in. For many on Okinawa, there was no front line. War was everywhere, in their homes, in their caves, in their minds. By late May, weeks of relentless pressure finally began to tell on the Shuri Line. American artillery and air power poured ton after ton of explosives into the ridges. Rain turned trenches into canals. Japanese soldiers lived knee-deep in mud, short of food, medicine, and ammunition. Positions that once spat fire now fell silent, not because they were destroyed, but because there was nothing left to fire. General Ushijima and his staff faced a terrible decision. Hold Shuri and be surrounded, or withdraw south and prolong the fight. True to his duty, he chose to withdraw in an orderly, disciplined retreat. Under cover of night and fog, Japanese soldiers slipped away from carefully constructed defenses, carrying wounded comrades on makeshift stretchers, hauling what little ammunition remained. When American patrols finally reached Shuri Castle, they found only ruins and emptiness. The ancient Ryukyuan palace, bombed to rubble, stood as a symbol of a civilization caught beneath the gears of modern war. Troops posed for photographs amid the shattered walls, but no one felt triumph. They knew what it meant. The Japanese had not surrendered. They had simply moved their stand further south toward new lines, new caves, new killing grounds. The fall of Shuri was a turning point. The battle was no longer about whether Okinawa would fall, only about how much more it would cost. As June approached, organized Japanese defense collapsed into scattered, stubborn pockets. The southern tip of Okinawa, around Mabuni and the final ridges, became a compressed hell of refugees, wounded soldiers, and last-stand positions. Caves overflowed with the dying. Ammunition was rationed bullet by bullet. Medical supplies were gone. Still, groups of defenders vowed to fight to the end. American units advanced behind rolling barrages, but the progress was slow and brutal. Each valley seemed to hold another hidden nest of resistance. Small Japanese units, often cut off from any command, launched sudden counterattacks, firefights erupting out of silence, then dying away just as quickly. Some defenders fought with little more than grenades and bayonets, emerging from cave mouths in final, desperate rushes. For the soldiers and Marines, the sense of exhaustion was total. They had been on the island for weeks, living in mud, under constant fire, surrounded by death. They had watched friends fall to sniper fire in the last days of the campaign, when victory seemed already certain. The final casualties of Okinawa felt especially cruel, lives lost on the very edge of survival. Yet the pockets fell one by one. By mid-June, the Japanese 32nd Army was shattered, its command staff preparing for their own final act. When organized resistance ended in June 1945, Okinawa was not a place of celebration. It was a scar carved into the earth. Over 12,000 Americans dead, more than 36,000 wounded, Japanese military losses in the tens of thousands. And, amid those numbers, a civilian toll so vast it defied comprehension. Men, women, and children lost in cave collapses, bombardments, and chaos. The island itself looked broken, villages erased, fields churned into mud, hills reshaped by explosives. The dead lay in temporary graves, their names recorded hastily, if at all. Exhausted soldiers looked out over the ruined landscape and understood what this victory meant. If invading one island had cost this much, what would an invasion of the Japanese home islands require? High Command drew the same conclusion. Okinawa became a grim preview of what awaited on Kyushu and Honshu. Fanatical resistance, enormous civilian suffering, and casualty numbers that bordered on unthinkable. It was in this context, under the shadow of Okinawa's blood, that American leaders weighed the final decisions of the war: blockade, invasion, atomic weapons. For the men who fought there, Okinawa was not an abstract lesson. It was the place where they learned that even victory in the Pacific could feel like a tragedy. By mid-June, General Mitsuru Ushijima understood the truth no commander wants to face. The battle was lost. His army, once over 100,000 strong, was broken, scattered across the southern cliffs and ravines of Okinawa. Thousands of wounded lay in caves without medicine. Ammunition was nearly gone. Communications were failing. And yet, discipline remained. Ushijima refused to consider surrender. He believed his duty was to delay the American advance for as long as possible, to force the U.S. to expect such catastrophic resistance on Japan's home islands that they would hesitate before attempting invasion. Every hour he held out was another hour bought for the homeland. On June 18th, he gathered what was left of his staff in a cave carved into the cliffs of Mabuni. Calmly, he issued his last orders. All surviving officers were to fight to the end or take their own lives. Civilians who wished to escape the horror were to be allowed through Japanese lines. And above all, no pointless final charge, no suicidal waste of young men. That night, Ushijima and his chief of staff, General Cho, performed a traditional seppuku ceremony. Their aides carried their bodies out under the moonlight and buried them facing west, toward Japan. When U.S. troops reached the cave the next morning, the headquarters was silent. The 32nd Army had died with its commander. After Ushijima's death, the fighting did not simply stop. Thousands of Japanese soldiers, cut off, starving, desperate, continued to resist from caves and ravines. Grenades rolled out from shadows. Snipers fired single, deadly shots before vanishing. Small groups launched sudden night attacks, determined to die killing at least one more enemy. The terrain itself made elimination agonizingly slow. Marines and army troops crawled into cave mouths with flamethrowers and demolition packs. Engineers pumped gasoline into tunnels and set them alight. Bulldozers sealed entrances under tons of rock. The smell of burned sulfur and flesh hung heavy in the humid air. American units rotated through the front lines, exhausted and hollow-eyed. No one slept deeply. Men jumped at echoes. A single shot from a hidden cave could kill a sergeant who had survived the entire campaign. Okinawa had become a place where the line between safe and dead barely existed. Even after the island was declared secure, mop-up operations continued for months. Some Japanese soldiers held out until 1946, not because they hoped to win, but because they refused to surrender. Okinawa was not just a battlefield. It was a grinder that consumed everything: armies, civilians, and hope. No part of the Okinawa tragedy was greater than what happened to its civilians. Tens of thousands of Okinawans emerged from caves as the battle ended, blinded by daylight, shaking from hunger, terrified of both armies. Many carried children on their backs. Others stumbled forward wounded, wrapped in torn blankets or pieces of old uniforms. Their homes were gone, their fields burned, their villages erased. American medics rushed to provide care. Water tanks were set up. Food was distributed. Field hospitals overflowed with both soldiers and civilians, their wounds indistinguishable except for the uniforms, or lack thereof. Doctors worked without rest, trying to treat burns, shrapnel injuries, infections, starvation. Some civilians cried with relief. Others cried because they believed they had betrayed the emperor by surviving. Okinawan history speaks of the typhoon of steel, the American shells, the Japanese bullets, the storms of metal that tore the island apart. But the deeper truth was this: the people of Okinawa were trapped in a war they never chose. And when the weapons finally fell silent, they faced the ruins of a world that no longer existed. Their survival was its own act of courage. When American commanders surveyed Okinawa after the battle, the conclusion was chilling. If this was what Japan could do on a single island, what would happen on the homeland? Okinawa was a preview of hell: the fanatic resistance, the kamikaze waves, the hidden tunnels, the mass civilian suffering. Military planners estimated that an invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall, could cost between 500,000 and 1 million American casualties and millions of Japanese deaths, military and civilian alike. Some predicted the war could drag on for years. Those numbers weighed heavily on Washington. They influenced every strategy debate, every meeting of the Joint Chiefs, every conversation between Roosevelt's successor, Harry Truman, and his advisors. The question was no longer how to win, but how to end the war without repeating Okinawa on an unimaginable scale. Okinawa taught the Allies a brutal truth: Japan would not surrender easily, and the price for forcing surrender by invasion would be catastrophic. The world stood at a crossroads, and no good path remained. On June 22, 1945, the Battle of Okinawa officially ended. The island lay shattered. More than 12,000 Americans were dead. Over 110,000 Japanese soldiers and Okinawan conscripts were gone. Civilian deaths exceeded 100,000. Hills were gutted, forests incinerated, villages pulverized. The sea itself was littered with the burned skeletons of ships. But from this devastation came the final turning point of the Pacific War. Okinawa became the last major battle, because it made clear that the next one would be unthinkable. As American bombers took off from newly secured airfields, preparing for the final phase of the war, leaders in Washington weighed their options: blockade, continued bombing, or a new weapon whose power the world had never seen. Okinawa was the moment the Allies realized they stood at the edge of a decision that would change human history. For the men who fought there, the battle would haunt them forever. For the world, it became the final lesson before the war's final act.